You're listening to the Small and Supercharged podcast with Ria Freeman, episode 173. Hi and welcome to this episode of the Small and Supercharged podcast, and today I'm going to answer a question I've been asked quite a lot over the last few years, well, since I started this very podcast, which is, should I start a podcast? Well, not I, as in you. Because podcasts can be the most incredible way to reach your current audience, reach new audiences, share ideas, thoughts, amazing people. And I know for me, it's provided lots of really incredible opportunities. So today I'm going to talk about some yays and nays, what rocks and sucks, what's good and bad about having your own podcast. And that will hopefully lead you towards a decision for you about whether or not a podcast is good for your business. As always, if you listen, please do screenshot, please share to stories, please tag me. I would love to know who's listening. And if you've got a few moments and fancy leaving a review, I would be hugely grateful. Just tap on the star icon wherever you listen. So first of all, podcasts are great. I mean, you're listening to this one, and I really look forward to releasing the podcast. I like listening to other people's podcasts. I find they're a really lovely way to learn, to connect. Just this morning, actually, a friend sent me a link to another podcast. Not anything I've listened to before, but it was really interesting. I learnt lots, and it's not in a way that I have to commit to anything. So podcasts are generally free to listen to, although some platforms do have paid for options now, but they're generally free to listen to, and they are a great way of getting your message out there and kind of meeting people where they are, because what we say a lot with social media is you meet people where they are. They're on Facebook, you're on Facebook. They're on Instagram, you're on Instagram. You are getting to people where they spend their time. The great thing with a podcast is rather than being something they have to look at, you can be in their ears. So particularly pre-COVID times when people had long commutes, podcasts were excellent ways of being with them, giving something to do, helping them learn, educating them, inspiring them, all those things when they were doing something which would have been kind of dead time. They're also great. I find podcasts really good for car journeys when I can't do anything else, I can't look at anything else, I can't watch anything else, I can't read anything else. But rather than listening to the radio, I often listen to a podcast. And it's like sometimes not always marketing ones. I know, it's exciting times. But a variety of different podcasts depending on what mood I'm in, what I want to learn, what's been on my mind. It just allows you to reach where they are. Equally, I don't do as much walking at the moment, but when I used to have a dog and I used to walk the dog each day, when I was on my own, I would always listen to a podcast, and it was great because I could go for miles and miles with the hound. She'd get a lovely walk and I'd get some good exercise, be out in the fresh air, and I also felt like I was learning, like I was doing something. So that to me made that time really valuable, and it allowed me to do more than just one thing. I love to feel like I'm multitasking. I know multitasking is a bit of an illusion, but walking, listening, being outside is just perfection. So you get people where they are, and you get them where other forms of media don't. So that's a massive plus for podcasts. Now I'm going to go for the nays first, or the what sucks, nays, sucks, whatever. First thing is, podcasts take a lot of planning. And I'm not someone who spends massive amount of time planning everything. I know some people are like, absolutely, they plan everything to the final detail. I'm not that person. For things like podcasts, speaking, anything like that, I don't do that. But even I plan. Particularly if you've got guests you're trying to interview, you need to plan those in advance, because it can be really difficult to speak to people when they're free, to organise your schedules together. And I know that moving forward, I need to get quite a few people booked in. I've got who I would like to have, but I just need to get that actioned and then liaise on dates, find out when I can make it work with my schedule and when they can make it work with their schedule. And that can take a lot of time. So you do need to plan. Even if you are just doing solo podcasts, and there's nothing wrong with that at all, you still need to plan the things you want to cover. Again, speaking to someone who's not an obsessive planner at all, I've got bullet points I want to cover. I always have bullet points I want to cover. Just takes a bit of time, and that quiet thinking time that allows you to plan. If you want guests, they can be absolutely awesome, but it does take time and planning. I'm just going to try and go down the nays first, because a lot of these have got counter arguments as well. the tech can sometimes be a nay. So I record on my MacBook Air, and I use Zoom if I'm doing an audio recording with a guest, and I use, what am I using now? QuickTime if I'm doing a solo podcast. But obviously, particularly with guest interviews, you're reliant on the strength of your internet, the quality of your internet, that your internet's not having an off day. And that can be sometimes incredibly frustrating if the tech fails. Sometimes when you're recording over the internet, it can sound a little bit robotic. And that can often be when the signal is, well, for me, where the Wi-Fi is struggling, when the internet's struggling, when it says my connection is unstable. I can sound robotic, or worse, the person I'm speaking to can sound robotic. And that's not ideal, but it is the times we live in, and tech is absolutely incredible. But if you're doing an audio recording, so you haven't got the visual to back it up, you need to make sure that the quality of the audio you're recording is as good as it can possibly be. It needs to be really, really good. And I know that when it goes quite robotic, I know the person that's editing this podcast, but my husband edits my podcast for me. Hi, Lol. When he goes through anyway, he takes a lot of those kind of pauses and those weird sounds out, if there are any. But I think that when audio is the only thing you're communicating with them through, you have to be incredibly picky about any pauses, anything that isn't quite right. So the tech can sometimes be can cause a lot of stress. If when you listen to it back, it's not quite what you wanted, if you can see the signal struggling when you're recording, if it says, internet unstable, that gets a sweat on for me. A few episodes ago, one of the interviews I had, as soon as we started, it started going wrong. It wasn't at my end, for the record, but it was just an internet issue at the person's end. And we did battle through, and we did get there, and I know I knocked my video off. I think she may have done as well. But we were kind of adapting and changing, but it is really stressful because after all the planning, and you've organised this person and you get to speak to them, and isn't that awesome? And then the audio is not good enough. So the tech can be a real pain in the neck. And if you're not prepared to sort of battle with that a little bit, if you're not prepared to adapt, change, improve, learn, try new things, and you're not prepared to edit, that can be a real problem. Which is another point on the nay side, the editing. So with this podcast I'm recording today, I know so far I've got one thing that needs editing out because I forgot the word robotic. Just share that with you now. So I know that will be edited out. Now, I don't do my own editing because honestly I could do it, but I'm not that, it's not my strong suit. I know that Lol, who edits my podcast, is like meticulous about it. He's much better at it than I am, let's be honest. I get the joy from recording, from sharing thoughts, from interviewing people. I really love that. I don't get the joy from editing. So if you are doing your own editing, it is going to take you time, and quite a lot of time depending on how many edits you have. So what I was just saying is that so far I know there's one thing that needs to be edited out of this podcast, and obviously we need the intro, the whole intro sequence, all of that putting on, and then we'll go through the podcast and look for any sound issues, change the levels if needed, edit out something that I've done wrong. It takes time. So you need to be prepared to put the time into it, and a significant amount of time. It's not a 5-minute job, or you pay someone to do it. I like to think I don't have too many edits especially when I'm doing a solo podcast. I don't think I have too many edits usually, and often with an interview, because I like to keep it as real as possible. We do keep it real. We do keep it as close to the unedited version as possible, but there are still tweaks that need to be made, and you still need to listen to the entire thing. So this podcast, realistically, it's not going to be a really long one because it's just me. But if I'm doing an interview with somebody, the length can run to an hour. By the time you've edited it down, or whatever, but even if you just listen to it through, it's 40 minutes, an hour, let alone if you're stopping, taking bits out, putting them back together again, making sure they sound okay. So it can be costly from an editing point of view, or it can take you a lot of time. It is a lot of work. It may not seem like it because I'm just talking to a microphone about podcasts, but all the things we've talked about so far is a lot of work, and more than, even when you've done the podcast, it's gone for editing, you get it back. I always listen to it through again at least once, sometimes twice. If there's anything I hear I'm not happy with, it goes back for re-editing. That doesn't happen very often, but you always need to listen to it. So it's a 40-minute podcast, that's another 40 minutes. Then when you upload it onto your hosting platform, you need to write the show notes. You need to make sure it's all connected in the right way. You need to I write different descriptions based on where it's going because you have different character counts. I like to write a blog about it as well, so it's on my website. Hands up, I'm slightly behind on those at the moment, but you do the blog, you do the image, and then you need to promote that. So then you need to kick in your promotion schedule with what images you need to promote it on the different platforms at which time. And it does take a lot of work to do all those things. It's not unpleasant, it's pleasurable work, it's work I really enjoy, but you do have to allocate that time. And it's important to allocate that time because you don't want to be putting out anything that you are not 100% happy with. And if you are rushing, if you haven't got time to listen to it before it goes live, that's just a fatal error. And I think that sometimes when we do things like that, it can mean that we don't promote whatever we're doing because we are not really sure it's as good as it can be. So you need to make sure you have put that time aside because it is a lot of work. Each stage takes a lot of work. Even when you've been doing it, I think this is episode about 173, maybe? Let's say 173. It's still a lot of work to do it because it's not like, oh, well, when you've set it up, it's easy. Setting it up, getting it on the platforms you want it to does take time, absolutely, and that is quite a slow process. But it's the work that still has to be done to put out a good quality podcast out each week that does take time. The cost, you have got the cost of the kit. I mean, genuinely for mine, I've got a MacBook Air anyway. I have that for work. So I just plugged in a microphone, which I've purchased. Editing software, depending on what you use, or someone to edit. Hosting software, depending on what you use. Then you need the hosting costs. You might use something that does an audiogram, which is like when it shows the sound waves you promote on social, you may have to pay for that. There are lots of costs involved in what you're doing. So the cost can really, really rack up quickly. Obviously, you can be careful with them, so perhaps you don't need an external microphone. I know people who fairly successfully record using their earphones with the little microphone attachment. I don't, but you could do. You could probably use free hosting. You could probably use some free editing software. I don't know because I pay for hosting and I pay to have them edited, so I don't know, but I know there are options. But there are probably compromises that it might take you longer. It might have ads on it. It's worth looking at those options. So there is a cost involved with podcasts, and that's important to note as well. So I think that's probably most of the nays. Got planning again, finding guests, the tech, the work, the cost, the time, and the editing. There's a lot there. There's a lot of nays. It's not something to undertake if you aren't prepared to spend the time or plan or do anything else. And I think initially podcasts always sound really exciting, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's that endurance that just will keep you going. But also it's that aspect of it that just can be very, very draining sometimes, especially if you're busy. But there are so many yays to it as well. So I think that I really enjoy doing the podcast for loads of reasons. I've met some incredible people through it. I've got to interview incredible people through it who I wouldn't normally get to interview and speak to. It's allowed me to share knowledge. It's allowed me to kind of show my podcast listeners people that I think are incredible and inspiring and tick different boxes. It's allowed me to help educate people, to promote things that I'm involved with that are really close to my heart and I'm passionate about and I want to help. And there's loads of examples. And last week we had Claire Lomas, who is absolutely inspiring. And I know from that podcast, loads of people have listened. I've had lots of comments saying, isn't she just incredible? And I know also from that podcast and from other promotion that I've done about it, people have donated to Claire's auction, which is going to mean she's going to raise more money for the charity Whiz Kids connected to her in the London Marathon. That is incredible. Going back a few more, I know when we talked about the Summer of Safety with Beata's Claire Williams and Dr. Di Fisher, I know that from some of the things that we shared on there, that it's got the potential to genuinely change how someone maybe acts when they get on a horse, that they decide to wear a hat rather than not. And of course, if they have a fall, that could have incredibly far-reaching impacts. Again, connected to Dr. Dye as well, when we spoke to Izzy Carlisle, and she talked about her fall and her mild traumatic brain injury. That was amazing, and I'm so honoured that she shared it with us all. But I feel like that could really help someone, and to me, that is just so good. I feel like I'm helping, and I think with what I do a lot of business coaching, I do social media coaching, I work with the masterminders. It's all, I want to help them have better businesses, promote themselves better, tell the world what they're doing. So anything I can do that helps, that fits really well with my values as a human. So for me, the podcast is a great way to do that. It's a great way to also share social media knowledge, to share things like that I've learned that I know can help people. It's a great promotional tool. Let's be honest. It's a great promotional tool because it provides a touch point for other people to know about me, to know about my skills, about my expertise, about the stuff that I know I can change because I do it all the time. And it allows me to share that with people, then give them the option of whether or not they might like to find out more about me, become a member of the mastermind group, ask about one-to-one coaching. It opens a lot. However, I would say that you've got to be very careful with it. I've listened to podcasts before that I found really interesting, really like the person, was interested in their services and products. But there was that flip that changed when they took on a lot of advertising on the podcast itself. So you'll know, I'll just do it now, get out of the way. I will promote the Small and Supercharged Mastermind group because it's my membership group. We do amazing things in there. I love that group. I adore helping the people. And that is one of the revenue streams for my business. If you're interested, riafreemanpr.co.uk, masterminds across the top, awesome membership group, mindset masterclass, marketing masterclass, weekly lives, opportunities, so much. You know I'm going to promote that. Now, because of the number of downloads, I have got the opportunity to sell ads on the podcast. I've made the very conscious decision not to do that at the moment because I don't want it to become something that people are like, oh Christ, it's more advertising. And I've stopped listening to podcasts where I felt it was so advertising heavy. Don't get me wrong, I do not mind people advertising in their podcasts. I don't mind them advertising their own services. I don't mind them advertising affiliate schemes. I don't mind them doing normal ads at all. But I listened to one and it was, I think the first 10 minutes of the podcast was an ad. And I thought, okay, interesting. And then I think they spoke for 10 minutes and then there was another ad. And I just felt like I wasn't connecting with that person. I was connecting to other things. So although it can be an amazing selling platform, you have to manage that. You have to balance what you're giving, as you do with any form of marketing, in my opinion, or any form of PR, or any form of social media. You have to balance it all. Because otherwise you are just saying, buy this, buy this, buy this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And you're not delivering the value that allows you then to ask. As Gary Vee would say, jab, 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 right hook. You've got to get the jabs in. So it tells a story. You can tell a story through the podcast. It gives you more opportunity. You haven't got a word count to worry about. You haven't got a time limit to worry about. You can just go for it. And that allows you to be more creative and explore more opportunities. You can share advice. It's accessible. So when you upload a podcast to whatever platform you're on, you'll have different destinations you can post it to. So this podcast is on Apple Podcasts, it's on Spotify, it goes to YouTube for some reason, I'm not quite sure, and it's on loads of other platforms. So even if someone isn't following me, they could find it. They could search for something and I could appear. And that's really exciting, that it's accessible to everybody. They don't need to enter a password, jump through hoops. They can go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever they listen to podcasts and find it. And it also means that I can be promoted to people, or the podcast can be promoted to people who don't necessarily know me but are interested in something I'm talking about. So that's a really cool opportunity too. You can be a part of people's lives when they're on the go, and you can connect to them in a different way. It can help to grow your know, like and trust factor, which is how people work up to do business with you. So when we build up all these touch points, it's helping people to get to know us. And that's, the podcast is another touch point. Then if they get to know us, they can move on to liking us, hopefully, and then hopefully trusting us. But we're starting that funnel of events, and the podcast is a great way to do that. As is video, as is social media, as our blog content, loads of different opportunities as well. You get to share your expertise through there, depending on the type of your podcast. It's almost like a free trial for people. So if you're listening now and you're thinking, oh, I might like her to coach me, might like to join the mastermind group. I'm like this all the time. When we do lives every Friday in the mastermind group and have a quick Q&A, I speak like this. I answer questions in the same way. I am this person. I think that's half the thing about why you need to be authentic in all your platforms, because then you don't have to remember who you were last time. But it's a free trial for people to get to see your expertise, how you explain things, how you describe things, whether they understand that, whether they need something different. It's a great way for people to get to know you, and also in a way that they don't have to sort of expose themselves, don't have to reveal that they're listening. I know how many people listen to the podcast. I know how many times people comment and get in touch with me from it. You don't have to reveal yourself. You don't have to do that. If you're exploring different people, if you're listening to different people, if you're watching their content, you've got that opportunity there to get to people that you don't necessarily know are listening, just like with social media, really. And I think that they're really the main really positives about a podcast. It can be really positive for your brand. It can be really positive as a piece in your brand jigsaw puzzle, but it's not without its trade-offs. Nothing is. Social media isn't without its trade-offs, and podcasts aren't either. I would say if you're thinking about whether you should do a podcast or not, I think being consistent is really important, putting the work in to make sure you are producing that regular content. Because if you do all the work to start with, you need to keep that momentum going, because it's really hard to get restarted. So try and commit to doing them in advance. That really, really helps. If you can batch that content together and make sure you can do a few podcasts at a time. I know when I'm feeling much more on top of everything, it's when I've got some podcasts in the bag, when I'm not kind of thinking, oh gosh, I need to record this. I've written out probably 4 or 5 podcasts today. I'm not going to record 4 or 5 today because my voice will go. But it's nice to have it in the bag. And if you are kind of committed to this and committed to the podcast, and if you're not committed, I wouldn't bother, because it does take a while to get it going. It takes a while to get it off the ground. It takes a while to get those really devoted listeners that will come back, that will flag wave for you, that will share. And if you do it once and think, oh, well, 4 people have listened. Well, why would loads of people listen to start with if you're not promoting it, if they don't know it exists? We know that when we share stuff on social, only not a small percentage, but let's say a small percentage of people see it that we would like to see it. When we put out a newsletter, not everybody opens it. So it takes time for people to build up this knowledge of what you're doing. So it's going to take time to get the readers, to get the reviews, to get the feedback that you want. So you've got to be in it for the long haul as well. I hope that's helped. Should you start a podcast? It's up to you. But I feel like hopefully through this podcast we've talked more about the positives and negatives, the yays and nays, the what rocks and sucks, and that will hopefully lead you more towards your decision. I should say I really love the podcast. I really love this podcast. I love listening to podcasts as well. I love recording them, and I think I personally really do enjoy it. There are times when I'm really busy and it feels like a lot to be recording, to be listening, to do everything else, because it is a big job. But equally, the rewards that have come from it far, far exceed anything negative. Thank you so much for listening today. If you would like to screenshot and share the stories, I would be eternally grateful. And if you have a few minutes and fancy giving me a review, a nice review, I'd be very grateful too. Have a really, really good day, and we will catch up soon. Take care.